Great to be here with you today, and I want to speak to you about empathy. And for the last probably 7-8 years, I've been talking about empathy, delivering keynotes. I did a TEDx on it a while back. And the reason I talk about this topic is partly personal, because very early on in my career, I was in a workplace that didn't have a lot of empathy. And I'm an introvert. Some of you here might be today. And that was back in the days before Susan Cain's book about introversion came out. So back then, people who perhaps were a little bit quieter in meetings or a bit more thoughtful before they make a contribution, it wasn't necessarily known that it was because they were introverts. And so early on in my working career, I actually found myself on probation in one role and let go from another, which wasn't a very sparkling beginning to a corporate career. But talking of storytelling that we heard from Danielle, I figured it makes sense to share a bit about my own background. But let's jump in, because I want to talk today about scenarios where empathy is not enough to move forward. And I know that sometimes we're told that as long as you're emotionally intelligent, as long as you treat everyone with empathy, that is enough. But let's look at when it may not be enough and what we can do to remedy that, because today is all about how to make braver, bolder decisions that are still wise and sensible. So just a quick question: if emotions were weather, what are you talking about today for yourself? So in the UK, as mentioned already, it's very hot and sunny, so definitely it's sunshine and stillness for me. But what about where you are? So just tapping into your own internal weather. And I'm feeling pretty sunny and shiny as well internally. But yes, oftentimes people who are well-meaning, they're emotionally intelligent, they want to do the right thing, but they can find themselves deliberating and wondering, well, what do I do in that situation? How do I make an impact, but also make sure that those people around me are served as well? And that can be a bit of a challenge, especially if you're somebody who's quite empathetic, because you want to make sure that you minimize your impact on other people, minimize your negative impact, and make sure you maximize a positive impact and ensure that those people get a say as well. Told you about myself, but we'll just flip back. So I work at the intersection of communication, empathy, and culture. And it's great to see so many large organizations that I've worked with bringing me in to talk about empathy because they realize the importance of it. So empathy is essential, but although it tells us how someone else feels, it doesn't always tell us the wisest course of action. And often you get leaders who are very empathetic, but then they become hamstrung because they think, well, I've got to make a decision, but it doesn't serve everybody. So we've got to find a way to make decisions, take as many factors as we can into account, but then, of course, move forward. So as I mentioned, good people are often second guessing themselves. And what happens in that circumstance is that they may hold back fantastic ideas that could innovate and move the workplace forward. They may end up delaying decisions because they're not quite sure what's the best thing to do. Maybe it has an impact on their confidence because they find that they're delaying. And also AI, it's ever present now, isn't it? People can defer way too quickly to using tools like AI instead of relying on their own senses and also what they've seen. So quick question for you. Did you ever hesitate to take action or speak up in response to a proposed change? And if that's the case, what was it that held you back? Okay, so in some cases, people don't like to move forward because they feel they don't have enough information. Sometimes it could be that it's a controversial topic or people are emotional and they don't want to provoke even more emotion. It could be that you're worried about the impact on other people. Could be that you feel you didn't really articulate your view and that held you back because you didn't share the full amount of information. Or it could be that it was risky to you to take some sort of action. And I was a board director at my local sports club. And I came in after the sports club was in some disarray because a bunch of directors had left. And it was only after I came in that I saw the reason that they had left. And it was because there was a sort of power struggle going on in the club. And the person that was managing the club wanted things a certain way. And anyone that wanted to change that ended up having to leave. So sometimes it's only when you get closer to the epicenter of action that you realize what's going on. And then you've got to decide, well, do I try and poke the stick a little bit further into this and ruffle things up? Or do you step back? And so those are the kind of decisions that we have to make all the time. And thanks, Tom says, sunny with a light breeze. I love it. So during periods of uncertainty, two common reactions are either to stay silent or outsource your judgment. And that's when you go to the tools. Maybe your organization has its own AI. Maybe you're using Claude, ChatGPT, you know, they're all there for all of us now. But as we've often heard, AI, although it can fake empathy and can be quite convincing at times, it lacks real empathy. So what it tells us isn't the full picture. So it's really important to rely on our feelings and add those to the mix because they are valuable data. And I'm going to share with you a little framework in just a moment that brings our feelings into account, but in a balanced way. But as I say, empathy, it's not enough, right? It helps us understand people. But if we think about everything that's going on in the workplace as falling as one of the legs of a three-legged stool, right? So we've got ourselves, what's going on for us. We've got what's going on for other people, which often empathy will help with because we can put ourselves in their shoes. And then we've got what's going on in the wider environment, okay? So a great workplace decision typically requires us to consider all of those three areas. And so if one leg of the stool is weak, so we haven't thought too much about perhaps ourselves, or perhaps the workplace environment, or what our actions will, the impact they'll have on the team, for example, then what can happen is our decision either leads to suboptimal results or we keep delaying. So the point is to really think about this three-legged stool and take all these three areas into account. So prior to any decision, questions we can ask ourselves regarding ourselves: can I regulate myself? Do I know what matters here? And can I move forward on this with conviction, or do I still need more data, for example? With others, it's about empathy, right? Have I listened enough to understand the impact on them? And then for our environment, it might be that there are risks involved. I talked about that sports center that I belong to, and where directors left because there was a power conflict going on. So perhaps if you realize that if you're going to get closer to that and try and make change, there's a risk to yourself. So you might need to consider that. What are the power dynamics? Are there any cultural rules that I'm ignoring because they are perhaps, in the water, but they're not written down? So I call the kind of decision-making behavior where you take all of this into account, I call it emotional audacity. And emotional comes from emotional intelligence, and audacity comes from bravery. And we can be brave if we know that we have enough information and we've taken everything into account. And that's why the three-legged stool is there to remind us of those three key areas before we move forward. So who are these others, right? So it could be your clients, customers, colleagues, vendors, people you collaborate with, okay? And then the environment, it could be your team, it could be the whole organization, it could be a business unit, a department, but just bearing in mind that the other and the environment could be different depending, of course, on your situation. So when we're under that pressure, you might be upset. You might be feeling, I don't want to upset them. You might be feeling like, oh, I've got to act a certain way because of the politics, the external pressures. So these are the things that are weighing on us before we can make a decision. So let's look at now what happens if we don't focus on all three legs of the stool at once. Okay, why are they all three important? So what about if we don't take ourselves into account when we make decisions? Well, you might find that you get resentful because you are constantly over accommodating, right? You're accommodating other people. You're not bringing yourself into account enough. It could be that you face burnout, or you feel indecisive, or it could be that your boundaries are a little bit on the weak side because you're so used to not discounting your own role. What about when other people are missing? Well, that's when you get leaders who perhaps are a little bit blunt. They stop all over other people. It could be that people become defensive because they know that they haven't accounted for others and their views. It could be that you start to create an environment where there isn't a lot of trust. People don't feel included, okay? People make decisions that are technically correct, but in terms of relationships, they are disastrous. And what about when we don't take into account the environment around us? So that can be when people make decisions which are seen as a bit green around the gills or naive, or they take steps that end up creating kind of political rows, right? They speak up at the wrong time. It could be that there's career damage that happens, which could have been avoided, right? Or you might have a good idea that lands badly because you didn't take the politics into account. Or it could be that you do something that damages the organization itself or damages the reputation of the team. And then what about if we allow just one of these areas to dominate and we forget the rest? So if you just allow it to be all about yourself, and when I think to this organization that I worked with, it was mainly about the manager, and he was very, very self-centered in the way that he did things. So he became very defensive every time anybody suggested something that went slightly against the way he moved. Then he would get very defensive, he'd get very reactive, protective, very much, yeah, what about me? This is my turf. So when you see people behaving that way, it could be because they are very self-oriented. What about when the other dominates? Okay, so we're very, very empathetic, but we don't take the environment and ourselves into account. So then you get very much people-pleasing behavior, people who are conflict avoidant, they over-accommodate, as I mentioned, and they don't want to upset anyone. And sometimes, quite frankly, you will ruffle a few feathers when you make a decision at work. And not everybody can always be accommodated all of the time. You've got to accept that. And then when the environment dominates, you find people that play politics. They are perhaps always waiting for permission before they take a step. They're very risk avoidant, or they're just very passive and accepting of, well, this is how it is. We can't change things. And let's just relate this to some data, shall we? Because it's all very well to talk about this three-legged stool, but let's see what employers think of this. And so this is a list of core skills that employers say are important to them. And you can see that leadership and social influence, which kind of relates to the environment, how do people deal with the wider environment, is pretty highly ranked. And then you've got how do you feel, which is around motivation, self-awareness, right? That's very much about your awareness of yourself. And then how the other people around you feel, empathy, active listening. Those are very much about our relationships with other people. So we can see that this very much tallies with key skills in the workplace. So let's think about how we can use this three-legged stool model. It's all very well to see it on the slide, but how can we apply this? Because quite often when we need to make decisions, they need to be done very quickly. We don't have a lot of time to think. So how can we use this model? And some of the options that we might have when we apply the model are, do we act now, right? So do we act now? Do we have an idea of what to do next? Or maybe we choose to act later after getting some more data, or we maybe will make a smaller action than we'd originally planned because we've taken the three legs of the stool into account. Or it could be that you think, well, you know what, I don't want to act and I feel good about the choice. And if I think about the sports environment that I told you about, the organization I belong to, I was a director for a while, but then I decided, well, you know what? I like to come here and play sport and enjoy. And everybody that's got really involved in this has ended up having to leave. So I ended up making a decision that I didn't want to act on that committee anymore, but I felt good about it because I took into account the past history and what was going on there. So the little framework I want to give you, it's called the 3 Fs, okay? And they stand for feel, because I said emotions are data, right? So feel, allow ourselves to feel in the workplace. Filter, using the three-legged stool, the three areas of the three legs, right? The self, the other, and the environment, and then decide on what we're going to do to follow through. So feel, filter, and follow through. What am I feeling? What happens when I filter the action I want to take through self, other, and environment? And then finally, what decision will I make and what will I do to follow through? So the 3 Fs. So let's look at a little scenario that I share with some of my clients. And imagine you're in a meeting, and let's say that you've shared some ideas in the past, and one of your leaders takes an idea and they misrepresent your work. Maybe they claim that the work is theirs. Maybe they sort of slate your work a little bit, but they kind of misrepresent what you've said and what you've done. So you personally, you feel your face heat up, you feel flushed, right? You want to jump in and correct them then and there in the moment. So the question is, what would you do next? Okay. Are you the sort of person who would want to speak up immediately? If so, put an A. Are you somebody who would say, well, okay, I don't necessarily want to speak up now, but I'm going to talk to them one-to-one later? Or are you somebody that would say, you know what, for a quiet life, I'm just going to stay quiet, stay silent, let it drop? Okay, so what would you do in that circumstance? I know that I'm somebody who might stay silent and then maybe just weigh on it, let it weigh on my mind for a while, and then decide if I speak to them one-to-one. I'm not necessarily the person that would speak up immediately, although it depends. It depends how passionate I feel about that topic. So now, though, let's revisit using that feel, filter, and follow through, okay? So imagine, right, you're feeling angry, you're feeling irritated, you're a little bit upset. So your urge is, I'm going to speak up now in this meeting. But then you consider the 3 legs of the stool. First of all, you think self. Now, you know that you're somebody who can get upset when you're angry, and sometimes you might speak a bit out of turn, or sometimes you kind of might yell or raise your voice. So that makes you think, oh, okay, maybe speaking up in the moment isn't the right thing for me. Then you think, okay, what about the other people here? Well, you know what? This leader's got a reputation for doing this, okay? Everyone knows it. They often misquote people's ideas, so everyone knows it. So it's not like this is the first time. And then you think about the environment that you're in, okay? And the environment, you know what? It's a small team meeting. There's 5 or 6 people there. I've got a great relationship with everyone in this team, apart from the leader, perhaps. But everyone here knows me, and they know the leader, and they know the kind of tricks that this person gets up to. So given all of that, taking that moment to filter through those 3 areas, how would you now follow through? Okay. And so typically most people would say, you know what? Maybe it's going to be better for me just to speak to that person one-to-one, or I might even just let it drop. Okay. Then you go to the AI tool, right? You say, well, okay, I've been thinking about this problem. I've got this boss. What do I do next, right? And you ask it. And then because the AI tools are typically quite sycophantic, right? The AI tool says, you know what, stick up for yourself. Say something in the meeting. Okay. So then now what would you do? So, there's no right or wrong answer. But when I have put this scenario to some of my clients in keynote talks and workshops, quite often they say, okay, well, you know what, with all that information, it sounds like it's not such a big deal after all, and I'm just going to let it go this time. Okay. So I want you to think, before your next important conversation, I want you to ask yourself, are you only seeing this through your own eyes? And if you're feeling perhaps very upset or defensive, that can be sometimes a warning, if you like, that you haven't really considered the bigger picture. Then ask yourself, what am I missing about the other person? And that's where you start thinking about the impact on them, or using your empathy skills. And then thirdly, what does this workplace need from me right now? And again, that might change the way that you had thought you were going to behave. And then after that, you choose the best action, not necessarily the easiest one or the simplest one, but now the best one, because you know that you've taken those 3 legs of the stool into account. Now, what I want to do before we close is talk about listening. And people often talk about listening as being a key skill, and we all, yeah, I know we need to listen. It's such an old chestnut, right? But listening is really powerful. And in particular, something I call audacious listening. And what is audacious listening? Well, it's listening with curiosity and being open and ready to challenge your own assumptions, right? So it means asking before we make assumptions. It means welcoming perspectives that are different than yours. It means trying not to become defensive, because quite often, if we can just lay that defensiveness down, there's a huge opportunity there for us in what we might learn. If we go to somebody and say, well, look, I'm not going to say a word. I just want to hear from you. What do you think about this? I want to hear your views. And even if you want to jump in and say, no, you're wrong, or yeah, I've got that already, you just keep that quiet so the person feels really free to share. And then also, key here, being willing to change your mind, being open and up for that. Because as we know, quite often people are very, very resolute. This is how I feel. I'm not going to change. But if you go to somebody and you say, look, I want to hear this, and I'm open to changing my mind if you can convince me, right? That will really set your conversation off on a different path. So as we go back to emotional audacity, practicing emotional audacity, how do we do this day to day? First of all, notice your own reactions. Get closer to yourself, okay? Have that self-awareness so that you can actually monitor yourself and not be so trapped in the next thing that you would do that you're not even aware of, that there's another way that you could behave. Listen before you decide. Consider the wider environment and also take the bravest, wise action. Okay, so I do have an infographic of the feel to follow through and the three-legged stool and some of the things that I've shared with you today. So if that's valuable to you, on the next page, I'll share a QR code that you can use to get hold of that infographic. And if you fill that little form out, it will also give you the link to my LinkedIn. Please do get in touch. I'd love to hear more from you, what you think about this content, maybe stories that you have of your own brushes with making decisions and what worked for you and what didn't. But yeah, please get in touch. So here's the QR code, or you can go to talk.ac/Shola Kaye/work decisions, and you can find out a bit more about me, share your thoughts about this, and get that PDF of the infographic. Okay, so one more slide, which was just a little, sorry, just bring it back in, but I do want to...
No, sorry.
Perfect. So yeah, what are you bringing? What might be missing? And then what's really going on here in the environment? So I leave that with you. And yeah, I'd love to have a chat with you. Sorry, I rushed you off the stage, but please do come back.
I'm back. No, you did rush me off. We were just too keen to come say hello again. Thank you so much. One of the hardest things I am challenged with on these summer series that we do and People First Summit is just to try and bring together such incredible content and ideas and thought-provoking ideas again from people like yourself. And there's just so much in there. I'm scribbling. I'm going to have to watch this back myself when we send it on demand. But I love the final thought there, to take the bravest, wise action. That's a real strong, powerful mantra almost to have in those situations. But we'll see if any questions do come in. But I just felt that there was real people first tools that you provided to allow people to work with each other as people and communicate and take the right actions. And there's just so much firing off on the brain there from the very go, saying one of your negative experiences has led you to where you are now. And that's one of our questions on our podcast is what negative experience at work has actually led to a positive, and here you are doing that. I think that's amazing. And the fact that the introversion piece, and I can relate to that because I actually find this takes a lot of my energy. So I'm drained after this hour. I love it, but it also is not my natural habitat to be here. But it also just, when you went through the meeting frustration example through the feel, filter and follow through, is you explain it in such a way that it really paints a picture for everybody, I'm sure, on here through an experience they have either had at work or life. And it just really brought my rheumatologist. I got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis about nine months ago, and I had the worst experience. My first meeting with my rheumatologist, and I've spent the next 9 months building up to my next meeting. How am I going to handle this? People said I should have complained at the time, and I was just walking through the steps, and I decided to say, you don't know what was going on in their lives that day. So I'm going to give this person a second chance. And I'm glad I did. And I hadn't taken that rush to action and had considered everything. And I allowed myself to go in there prepared to act in a different way myself and be more prepared for how they might act as well. So I went in and behaved differently myself, but they had also put a change of behavior. So it was a really, really good interaction. But just so much in there. Thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to close off with? I hope I haven't just a verbal diarrhea back at you there, but there was just so much gold in there. I absolutely loved it. I'm really energized by it.
Wonderful. No, I'm really excited that you found it valuable, Matt. And yeah, it's great I often do keynotes and there's not a lot of time to chat to people or just hear about the impact on them of what the content did. So yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, it's been great.
I know for a fact that our community and viewers, whether they're watching it right now or on demand, are going to take a lot of this. And the people who consume this content have a big reach within their teams and organizations. So the impact will be far reaching. And I'm sure they'll be reaching out to you on LinkedIn and downloading that infographic as well. So just very grateful for your time, your experience and expertise and sharing it with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt, for the opportunity. Great to meet you as well.
Great to meet you too. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.